Thank you, Katie. Let me go to the slide presentation here. Hopefully it'll pop up beautifully. Can everybody see that? Hopefully. Yeah, today I want to welcome everybody. My name is Craig Kalagi. I'm the Business Development and Sustainability Manager for San Pasqual Valley Soils located here in Escondido. We're an affiliate of the Frank Conine Dairy that's been here for 60 years, since 1962. In the San Pasqual Valley. We're just adjacent to the Wild Animal Park, San Diego Wild Animal Park. And as such, we are also very, very involved in the survival of agriculture here in this valley, in that we farm approximately 350 acres, most of it forage for our dairy operation. We are the last remaining dairy in all of San Diego. There used to be over 150 here. So that tells you a little bit about agriculture in an urban environment. And we're going to be talking about peri-urban agriculture. I'll define that for you. And we'll discuss why it's important and what we can do about it, and why we need to understand the unique characteristics of agriculture on the urban fringe. We're only about 5 miles literally from the 15 freeway and the West Bridge shopping mall. So it tells you a little bit about how close we are to urban neighbors, and again, why that's important to understand its characteristics as it relates to the survival of farms here in this region of the state. So with that, I'm going to go to the first slide. Let's make sure I can advance it here. There we go. I'm also on the board of the Association of Compost Producers. San Pasqual Valley Soils is a permitted compost facility, and as such, we have to abide by all the state rules and regulations governing compost facilities. And we got into the composting business over 15 years ago when we started to compost our cow manure and make it available to growers and to landscapers as a manure-based compost that's certified by the Organic Materials Review Institute and suitable for use in organic production. We are the only, to my knowledge, OMRI-approved manure-based compost provider in the entire region. So even that, with the demise of all the dairies and other livestock operations, you will find it's difficult to find an actual manure-based compost that actually meets these qualifications. We have different supporting members. It's a state branch of the U.S. Composting Council, the association is, and we also represent by default all the other organizations that are affiliated with the U.S. Composting Council, but there are a relatively small number of supporting members. So let's get, so I just want to give you that background, because we're going to talk a little bit about the role of compost as it relates to peri-urban agriculture and some of the solutions that it provides. So what is it? Well, by definition, it is agricultural practices within and around cities, which compete for resources, land, water, energy, labor, big one, labor, that could also serve other purposes to satisfy the requirements of the urban population. And that's a definition put forth by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. So there are a number of other definitions of it, but that one I particularly liked. I thought it really focused on the fact that all of agriculture in and around cities competes for extremely valuable resources, but also can protect those resources. And we're going to learn a little bit more about how that happens. Now, I titled it From the Perspective of a Plant Pathologist. My background, I got a master's and PhD from University of California, Riverside. Too many years to remember. As a plant pathologist, went to work as a farm advisor and county director for the University of California Cooperative Extension up in Santa Clara County, where I served for a good number of years. Was also superintendent of the Bay Area Research and Extension Center. And as such, we had a partnership with the city of San Diego. It was called Agriculture in Partnership with San Jose, where we were repurposing recycled organics from the metropolitan areas out into the surrounding farms to sustain and to support them. Now, what of us plant pathologists, we're not a common commodity in society. We're basically the plant doctors, if you will, that deal with plant diseases as they come up and focus on the organisms and the environmental conditions that cause these diseases. And as such, we have to understand the mechanisms of the disease, the interactions, particularly between the various causal agents and the plant, the host, and the methods for managing and controlling plant diseases. So what does that have to do with peri-urban agriculture? Well, I'm no sociologist. I'm not a city planner. I'm not an architect. I am who I am, somebody that was trained by the University of California to understand what's going on with plant diseases and why they happen and how to prevent them. So if I take that approach and I apply it to urban agriculture, it gives you a little different perspective. So I'm going to share with you the simplest way I can of what constitutes a plant disease, how it occurs. And it's called the plant disease triangle. It's very commonly used in particularly plant pathology 101. And what it does, oops, sorry, let me go back. See if I can go back here. What it does is it shows that you have to have a susceptible host. You have to have a favorable environment to the pathogen, which is the genesis of suffering. Anything that causes suffering to the plant is a pathogen, something that generates suffering. It can be an organism. It can actually be abiotic factors, such as salinity, such as a hailstorm could be an abiotic effect. You can have things like dodder, which is a parasitic plant that can infect plants. But all three of these components, a susceptible host, a virulent pathogen, one that's strong and healthy, and a favorable environment to the pathogen, not to the host, but to the pathogen, all result in disease. If you eliminate any one of these corners of that triangle, you in effect stop the progress of the disease and you do not have disease. So when we look at trying to control plant disease, we look at what we can do possibly to develop an immune, genetically modified plant that's not susceptible to the organisms that are attacking it. Or maybe we look at the environment that's favorable to the pathogen. We say, how can we make that environment favorable to the host at the expense of the pathogen? How can we shift the balance in that environment so that the host thrives and the pathogen struggles? And then the pathogen itself, either eliminating it, and that's always been the program that the chemical industry promotes, which is develop chemicals, pesticides to attack the pathogen, knock that population down to give an advantage to the host, the susceptible host, and allow it to thrive. It's no different than when we're using an antibiotic in that respect to control a human disease. This triangle, we call it the plant disease triangle, but it's actually, it applies to all disease, whether it's a human being or a plant. All three of these components play a role in whether a disease occurs or not. So let's apply the same thinking, the same thought process of plant pathologists approaches a disease on, and let's apply it to peri-urban agriculture, this agriculture that exists on the interface between an urban and a rural environment. And in this particular scenario, you've got the susceptible host, and that's the farmer and the nurseryman. It's not as much the farm as it is the people that manage and steward that land and control that property to produce a crop or a product like in our case, dairy milk to feed the population. Then the virulent pathogen then in this scenario, I would say, and believe me, I struggled with this, trying to figure out what is the most virulent source of suffering to the survival and health of agriculture in an urban environment. And I came up with human indifference. Not necessarily ignorance, because people are aware of agriculture, but do they care? How important is it to them in their daily life? And what difference does it make whether we're here or not? So that, for me, is the virulent pathogen that all para-urban agriculture needs to deal with. And then the environment and all the competing needs and interests, not only the needs of the farmer and the nurseryman, but the needs of the urban population in which we coexist within. So the disease and loss of a culture built upon agronomic practice, and let's take the word culture and just say way of life, okay? The culture includes so many things, but the disease and loss of a way of life built upon agronomic practices occurs when people become disconnected and therefore indifferent, not only to where and how their food and fiber nursery and landscape plants are produced, but also disconnected from those responsible for producing these products locally. Now, the benefits of a culture directly associated with farming and what it contributes to urban life are typically no longer recognized by the general urban population, or appreciated or considered relevant in the lives of the local urban community. And that's because of the fact that they're not engaged in with this culture or way of life on a daily basis. It goes back to Joni Mitchell's song, back the Big Yellow Taxi, back in 1970 when I was in school, and she wrote and sang, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." And she wrote that when she was in Hawaii at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, out looking over the landscape, and saw this huge parking lot outside her hotel there with all this beautiful agriculture kind of encroaching on, or maybe the parking lot encroaching on the agriculture. But it really summarizes this indifference that starts to occur as we start to distance and disconnect ourselves from the people and the way of life associated with agronomy and agriculture. So let's look at this agriculture in San Diego County that exists within this urban sphere, this urban fringe that we call para-urban agriculture. Well, we currently have the highest concentration of certified organic farmers in the nation. We're ranked #1 in California and in the nation in the production value of avocados, nursery and floriculture crops. There are more farms and small farms here than in any other county in the United States, with a total of approximately 5,000 farms, in which 70% are considered small scale. And the average size farm in San Diego County is 4 acres roughly. We're not a lot of big farms. We are an exception here at KD Farms in that we farm 350. That's rather rare, very unusual that that amount of property or land is even available to produce forage, which is why you see so few dairies left here in the area, or livestock operations that depend upon forage production, and a lot of it. So then what's the problem? I mean, it seems like agriculture is thriving pretty good in San Diego. Well, before we get to that question, let's look at what are the benefits of local agriculture. And a healthy local agriculture is built upon healthy local soils. And what these healthy soils provide are improved soil tilth and structure, which then enhances the soil biology. It creates the home for soil biology. I'll give you something to contemplate. A 1 acre, 1 foot deep of a healthy soil is the equivalent to the weight in microorganisms in biology of 1 cow. That's about 1,600 pounds of biological soil life per acre in a healthy soil. And it also, this improved soil and biology goes a long ways towards infiltrating what available water we do have falling through our rainfall and our irrigation, and it conserves and holds that water like a sponge. So it's extremely valuable for water conservation, which is so desperately needed, and irrigation efficiency. A 1 cubic foot of good ½ inch minus compost will literally absorb and hold 4 gallons of water. So when we use these recycled organics, as we'll be talking about in a bit, we are bringing tremendous benefits to the ability of our land and our landscape to hold this water and use it efficiently. Carbon storage in the soil is another big subject these days in the form of carbon farming or climate smart farming. And that's because we have a overabundance of carbon due to the burning of fossil fuels for so many generations, and it's heating our planet up. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that coming, but the ability to store carbon, agriculture is the only sector of our culture that actually has the ability to not only store carbon, but to be carbon negative, meaning we can take carbon out of the air and put it back in the soil where it does more good than what it's doing up in our environment right now. Fertilizer, keep in mind, carbon in our environment is essential to warming the planet. We just have way too much of it. It's out of balance, and that's what we're talking about here. Fertilizers and pesticide reduction and replacement, and then reduce pollution of watersheds through the absorption of these contaminants through healthy soil. And then healthier plants equal healthier people equal a healthier society. Someone, if they could mute their microphone, I'm hearing a lot of scratching in the background. I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So, what's the key resource that delivers all these benefits? Well, a healthy local agriculture is built by healthy farmers and nurserymen. Let's never forget that. And healthy farmers and nurserymen require a decent standard of living, available quality land and water to farm, and educational support for financial planning, production, and marketing. So what is a decent standard of living? Well, if you look 75 at the data, 75% of all farms in the US post less than $50,000 a year in sales. Not in net profit, that's in sales, that's gross revenue, according to the US Department of Agriculture. The bulk of American ag output comes from farms with sales of $1 million or more. What's more, many American farmers hold a second job off farm. And recent USDA data suggests that American farmers depend on second jobs for anywhere from 10 to 83% of their incomes, depending on what they raise. And that's not something new. When I was a farm advisor in Santa Clara County, I talked to some of the old orchardists, that were still raising cherries and what have you, that had passed down to the families. And I asked them how they survived around the turn of the century in the 1920s and 30s. And they said the only way farms survived in Santa Clara County in the Valley of Heart's Delight back then, 80, 90, 100 years ago, was the women taught school, because the husbands were out busy farming, where it was pretty much even then a break-even proposition. Bottom line is, farming is an extremely difficult profession to make money. It's not necessarily, you don't go into farming to make a lot of money, bottom line. So what's the cost of living in San Diego if in fact 50,000 is the gross sales of the average farm in the United States? Well, we're the 14th most expensive city in the United States, San Diego is, and the median salary is around $64,000. You can see the disconnect here already, that if you've got, and you're expecting to have farmers live and prosper and be healthy in an urban environment, it's going to take a lot more than $50,000 a year to necessarily survive. So the great tragedy of our society and the sadness is that many no longer even recognize or feel the loss of an agricultural society built upon agrarian values that sustain and improve the quality of life and that of the planet. And Thomas Jefferson recognized this way back when, and he believed that the US would be more successful if they were an agrarian society, one focused on agriculture. Both he, Washington, and many of the founding fathers were all farmers. And like so many farmers today, they were part-time farmers. In 1787, he said, "I think our governments will remain virtuous for many centuries as long as they are chiefly agricultural." And he stated that to James Madison, one of the co-founders of the Constitution of the United States. He also went on to say, at the same time, agriculture is the most tranquil, healthy, and independent occupation. And I'd like to challenge the independent. I think in a para-urban environment, we are talking about co-dependence. And that means we need the urban population in order to survive. Back then, it wasn't a problem, it is today. So what happened to our agrarian society that Jefferson so cherished and our founding fathers wrote an entire constitution around? Well, historically, all urban populations actually depended upon para-urban agriculture to sustain themselves. It was the surplus from agriculture which allowed cities to grow and develop. And then along came cheap and plentiful fossil fuel and synthetic nitrogen, the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen using fossil fuels. That literally changed almost overnight the nature of agriculture in and around cities, as well as the rural population and how we farm. We went from a organically dependent farming system to more chemically intensive and definitely tied to fossil fuels. And America evolved from a sustainable rural agrarian culture into a non-sustainable urban rural culture of competing interests. And so we have this difficult dynamics going on between our advances in our technology and available relatively inexpensive energy that's getting more expensive by the day, and a way of life that we knew could solve a lot of problems and did for so many centuries. So why is para-urban agriculture important today, given that all these advances and the nature of farming around most of the country and in California? Well, there's a growing concern about the water and food security to meet the increases in our population in urban environments. The cities, to be livable and sustainable into the future, need to maintain the natural resource base and ecosystem services in the para-urban areas surrounding cities. We need to re-embrace and bring back local agriculture and sustain what local agriculture we have here in order to maintain a livable and sustainable future. Changes within these areas, these para-urban areas, can have significant impacts on agricultural uses and productivity, the environmental amenity and natural habitat of the area, supply and quality of the water, water and energy consumption, and atmospheric carbon sequestration, or air quality. So what will it take to restore our lost agrarian culture in and around cities? This model that Jefferson envisioned as maintaining the quality and success of our society? Well, I have 3 points, and I had to work really hard just to simplify it just to 3 points. Recognize the role of healthy, vibrant agricultural communities coexisting within or near an urban environment, and the importance of supporting and investing in their survival and success. Number one. That's that awareness. That's addressing that indifference. Create a realistic strategic plan then in partnership with urban leaders and farmers and nurserymen that prioritizes agricultural needs and resources as an essential part of urban planning and development. And the last third point, identify the financial resources and funding opportunities necessary to support existing agricultural enterprises, as well as nurture the development of new farmers and nurserymen interested in agricultural careers in San Diego County. So there's 3 bullet points. There's a lot wrapped up in that. So let's start to kind of unwrap it a little bit. First, I think it's important. Any pathologist worth their salt not only understands what causes diseases, but he understands what health looks like and where the health exists and how to support and promote health. So the first thing in any disease situation is to recognize, where is the health? What do we need to build upon? It's that old theory that is the glass half empty or half full? Well, I just post just a few of the examples of agricultural health resources in San Diego County. The first one is the Farm Bureau that's hosting this. absolutely essential, absolutely the bedrock of so much of what we need to sustain and to be able to survive in these para-urban environments. The San Diego County Resource Conservation District, which is a phenomenal resource available to all of us, and actually has a whole section of their program dedicated to soil health. They are who I look to when I really look at what soil health is, how do I assess it, how do I create it, how do I protect it. Those are the folks I'll go see, along with the University of California Cooperative Extension, which is listed. We also have local programs here in Escondido, the Escondido Growers for Agricultural Preservation, the avocado growers, EGAP, and how critical they were to forging a partnership with the water resources to be able to have the water available and to be an asset to the continued availability of water and agriculture coexisting in the Escondido and San Diego area. The Leichtag Foundation, Coastal Roots Farm in Encinitas, was there yesterday at an excellent farmer to institutions workshop with growers and chefs working together to understand how they can support local food production and the health of the community. San Diego Food Shed, a program associated with Solidarity Farms, a tremendous asset in downtown San Diego, making food available from the farmers to people that are food insecure within our community. I already mentioned University of California, which I was a part of for so many years, tremendous asset. They are filling 48 new positions in California that were funded. A number of them will be directly related to the issue of para-urban agriculture and survival. San Diego Food Systems Alliance, Community Health Improvement Partners, the Farm to Institution Center, Edible San Diego, USDA, the California Department of Food and Ag, and the San Diego County Compost Producers. All of these organizations are absolutely vital to sustain and to continue to develop the agricultural health in San Diego. Now, the key to successfully sustaining para-urban ag in San Diego will be then to embrace the opportunity to be an effective solution to a major existential threat, which is climate change, through carbon farming and regenerative ag practices. And we're working closely with the County of San Diego, as is the Farm Bureau and all these other organizations I listed, to come up with a decarbonization plan and to play our role as solution providers in addressing what we are dealing with in terms of climate change and global warming. Quantitatively, this is a big one. I highlighted in a different color because I think it's so critical. You can't manage what you can't measure. So we need to start quantitatively measuring the benefits of local agriculture and communicate clearly and effectively these benefits to urban leaders and citizens if we want their support and buy-in. If you can't show them quantitatively how much water they're going to conserve, how much water they're saving and capturing, and all the other benefits to air quality and to the soil health of a community, then how can we expect them to support us? They will remain indifferent because we have not done our job to communicate to them clearly why it's so critical that they do this. And that gets to the last point: financially and politically support the development of new local farmers and nurserymen and their access to available public land and housing, as well as the private land as well. So these are just some of the ideas I put forward. We also need to think creatively and outside the box on how agriculture can solve the local food insecurity, deliver environmental services, and reduce the impact of climate change. All the benefits we were talking about earlier. And most importantly, we need to be patient in dealing and engaging with a public that has been long disconnected from their agricultural past, and be kind and tolerant of all viewpoints, regardless of their source and or their practicality. In short, all ideas and inputs are welcome, and we need to be patient with each other as we work together to forge an alliance that can reestablish our agrarian heritage. So here are some slides from the Compost Association of Compost Producers that we put together. That it was a call to action, what we must do. And it was, we recognize, even as an organization of compost producers, we had to monetize the benefits better, right? Soil organics, integrating mulch, compost, biofertilizers, biochar into our agricultural and landscape practices. And then the water conservation and water quality improvements, water quantity enhancement, stormwater quality and enhancement and capture, and then carbon sequestration and recycling. All of these are critical benefits that we need to be able to communicate clearly the role agriculture has to play in this and its use of recycled organics. We need to collaborate and integrate across disciplines. Air, water, solids, and energy all play a role. Air, water, and solid waste are all regulated here in the state, as is energy. And all four of these major categories or areas need to come together to create integrated solutions where all of them benefit. There is a synergy between taking care of the soil through the responsible repurposing of recycled organics, which comes from our waste stream that we've treated as waste, now need to treat as a resource. So we create that soil, which then improves the water quality by filtering it and infiltrating it, and improves the air quality by sequestering that carbon. And agriculture has a major role to play, both urban and sustainable agriculture, which kind of is an oxymoron. If it's urban, it's got to be sustainable and it has to be environmentally safe. So Senate Bill 1383 is a bill some of you may or may not be familiar with. It was the short-lived Climate Pollutant Act of 2016. It was passed into law and it became effective in January of this year. And what it basically is a new state mandate requiring every city and jurisdiction and county in California to divert 75% of organics from landfills to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. That's going to require a tremendous effort. It's a fully packed, very, very revolutionary bill. We're the first state in the United States to pass such a bill, and it has procurement requirements for compost and its utilization. And I put the link there. Just Google it, this SB 1383 procurement requirements, and there's a ton of information on CalRecycle's website on this bill that will affect the lives of every one of us. And it's also a tremendous opportunity for us to now start connecting the dots between this very valuable resource of recycled organics and how it can improve our chances and our ability to survive as an agricultural industry in an urban environment. Now I'm going to show you a series of slides, and then we're going to wrap this up, of how Orange County, I was working for a company called Filtrix International at the time, and I introduced a sock technology developed by Rod Tyler. You'll see his photograph here shortly, where we could grow using recycled compost, grow vegetables basically on a parking lot. And this is at the Great Park of Orange County. And a gentleman by the name of Eric Cutter created the Alegria Socks Farm. And we filled the socks with recycled organics. And then he used a lot of natural fertilizers and just a lot of know-how in terms of how to grow plants in a sock system using recycled organics. And so here is, you can see the big orange balloon at the Great Park of Orange County there in the background. And this is what it looked like after we gave it a little time to develop. And you can even see the compost being used as a path for erosion control in between the planting area. But you can imagine all the different parking lots where you could literally do this. In fact, what Eric did, and I'm just going to go through these very quickly. This is some celery, some radicchio, pretty much grow just about anything. He introduced this to the Second Harvest Food Bank of Orange County, and they placed it on tables that he created. Here's some cabbage. Here's some kale, and elevated it. And they are now growing fresh vegetables, organically produced, for the Second Harvest Food Bank for the food insecure population of Orange County using this technology. So this is Rod Tyler. And here he's talking to students at a school in Los Angeles, in a very food insecure area, income challenge. This is a area of Los Angeles which was in need of a lot of help. And this teacher here introduced the socks and started the students growing their own crops and created a program called the Globally Responsible Environmental Education Network, Jan Barber Doyle of Bell Gardens High School. And so it just shows you how you can take an idea like this, and when you think outside the box, you can do some wonderful things. Here's a school, a high school in Huntington Beach that was right near the beach that used compost filter socks in their garden to filter the stormwater before it ran into the receiving inlets and out into the ocean to preserve and clean that water by filtering it with recycled organics. And here again is the farm at the Great Park. And I just show this because 50% less water is used in this system, 50% less fertilizer, and it's just another way of bringing agriculture into an urban environment where it's appropriate and it solves a lot of problems for us. So I'd like to end by quoting one of my favorite mentors, if you will, Wendell Berry. He's a writer from Kentucky and a wonderful advocate of rural local agriculture. And he wrote the book, The Pleasures of Eating, or an article called The Pleasures of Eating, where he said eating is an agricultural act. And what he's trying to say there is that you have political power in your everyday actions. When you decide what you're going to eat, what you're going to buy, you have real influence. And that's why this idea has the potential to resonate with so many people. So he asked the question, so what can city people do? Meaning that is to support local ag. Well, you got to eat responsibly, and eating ends with the annual drama of the food economy that begins with planting and birth. The eaters, that is all of us pretty much, obviously, must understand that eating takes place inescapably in this world, that it is inescapably an agricultural act, and that how we eat determines to a considerable extent how the world is used. This is a simple way of describing a relationship that is inexpressibly complex. To eat responsibly is to understand and enact, so far as one can, this complex relationship. With that, I'd like to say that our farmers, I'd like to end on why do farmers farm? And this again is from Wendell Berry, and he states, why do farmers farm given their economic adversities on top of the many frustrations and difficulties normal to farming? And always the answer is love. They must do it for love. Farmers farm for the love of farming, and they love to watch and nurture the growth of plants. And that's really at the heart of why it's so important for us to support the Peri-Urban agriculture here in San Diego. San Diego County's quality of life depends on the quality and health of our soils and the agricultural community that creates, stewards, and maintains this health. This requires everyone, especially our urban communities, to take on and share in the responsibility of providing what is needed to not only sustain our current agricultural producers, but to grow a much greater awareness to combat the indifference, grow an awareness of how essential a society built on agrarian ideal is to our future survival and that of the planet. If San Diego and the U.S. agriculture is to have a hopeful future, then we must discover new ways of growing in and around urban areas that transform and repurpose this landscape in ways we never dreamed possible. With that, I'd like to open it up to questions from anybody that's listening or still on, and glad to address them as they come at me. And please engage wherever and as often as you can to grow San Diego's agricultural society. We need it. Any questions? Hello, anybody there?
You can ask your questions over the mic or in the chat box. Craig, someone says they're curious about the sock method.
Yes, that was introduced back in 2001 by Rod Tyler. He was one of the gentlemen that was there. And it's always been revolved around the use of recycled organics. Rod came from the recycling industry, and he came up with an idea of putting compost primarily in socks initially to filter stormwater contaminants. And it became somewhat of a de facto standard back east where it rains a lot, but it's been slow to be adopted here in the West. It doesn't rain as much, and compost typically is a little bit higher investment up front than some of the stormwater BMPs that are currently used by the industry. And so the introduction of Senate Bill 1383 has now changed the environment, if you will. Remember, we talked about environment and being so critical to survival of agriculture. It's changed the environment where compost and recycled organics are now being mandated to be utilized by every city in the state of California. And that's a mandate that comes with a financial penalty that will kick in 2 years, and I think 2024, if cities are not diverting these recycled organics, composting them, or making biofuel with it, and also recovering wasted food that is going to the landfills. The state of California regulatory agency, CalRecycle, has the right to penalize people financially for not doing it. So it has some regulatory teeth, but it's going to take a lot of effort. And the first effort is to incentivize people to do the right thing, not necessarily bring out the stick. I'm a big believer that if you work with people and you educate them, they will do the right thing, by and large. And so the sock technology is a technology that at one time we had manufacturing here in San Diego County, and it went away because there just wasn't enough interest. And I have worked with Filtrix International, and we brought the equipment back, and we are going to be making available here in San Diego County the ability to fill socks for both growing crops as well as for filtering stormwater and developing green infrastructure for watershed protection and management. So if anyone wants more information on the technology associated with socks, go to Filtrex, Filtrexx. There's 2 X's at the end of it, Filtrex.com, and they have an entire website that will explain how they use the sock technology. But we are bringing back that technology back to San Diego, where we can use it to divert and utilize local produced compost for developing not only urban farms, but also for protecting the water quality. So hope that answers your question. My contact information is there too. Anybody wants to email me, I can always direct you and send you information on how to get in touch with some of these resources. Okay. Should we look at the chat there, Katie? See if there's any questions there that need to be addressed.
Yeah, the kale and cabbage photos we saw, were those growing out of compost fitted inside of these long socks?
Yes. Yes, they were. Yeah, it's amazing if you give plants the nutrients and that, how much you can grow in such a small amount. But keep in mind, the socks contain more recycled organics than you think. A 3-foot by 8-inch diameter grow sock, if you will, contains almost the equivalent of cubic foot of garden soil. So it's more than you think in each one of those little socks. And the root system, what's interesting about sock technology is the root system grows towards the edge of the sock. It gets air pruned, forcing more laterals on the root system, thereby optimizing the genetics of the plant by producing a more prolific root system within the growing space, thereby being able to extract more nutrients from that smaller area of growing media. So it's a rather interesting, it also cools the root system down so it doesn't get too hot. So if you're growing in a plastic container, the container can really absorb a lot of heat. The stalks actually evaporate moisture, but that compost is so effective at holding moisture in that it's typically not an issue. And there's a lot of information on the web on farming or growing. There's a website called gardensocks.com, and there are other, if you look up garden socks and grow socks, it's socks with a double X, SOXX. You'll see a lot of information online regarding that kind of technology. So we've got about 10 more minutes here. I wanted to leave enough time for questions. So if there's any topic we covered, or I covered, I should say, let me know. There's a lot to be hopeful for. I will say that. It's very easy to get discouraged sometimes, but there's nothing more healing to one's psyche than to engage in the act of growing something. I assure you it's in our DNA, and when you feel hopeless and you feel overwhelmed, I remember once reading about a journalist who was so stressed out from timelines and living in this modern society that he ran outside his backyard door and jammed his hands into soil and grounded himself in the earth itself. And he said it was absolutely miraculous how his stress went through his body back into the earth just by connecting to the land. And that's why people farm. It's that genetic connection to the earth that we all depend upon and is so important to our survival and the survival of our air quality, water quality. Anything else that anyone would like to discuss? I will say this, next month in May, I think it's May 18th, if you check the Farm Bureau calendar for under events, I will be giving a presentation on case studies of Peri-Urban agriculture here in San Diego and what's working for these folks and what's not working, where people, the growers themselves need help, and where urban populations can, by listening and by being patient, offer a hand and sustain what agriculture not only we have, but grow new farms and new farmers by supporting all the organizations I mentioned earlier. EGAP is a great one. There's a number of them out there. Farm Bureau, always. These are all great resources. Use them and become engaged and talk about it. Bring it up. It's got to be a table conversation that's a lot more important than it has been. There's a lot of competition for our attention in an information overload society. And one of the areas that needs a lot more attention is the role of agriculture in the quality of our life and our planet. Question was, does anyone know what happened to the dairy farm in San Marcos? Like so many dairy farms, one just closed down in Ramona. There were 2 of us left as of the beginning of this year, but the feed costs and the transportation cost of bringing feed into the dairy operation are exorbitant. I mean, you can only imagine with the cost of fuel. And in addition, it's very difficult for us to convert to an organic local dairy program because there are so many hurdles. We're working with the city of San Diego as we speak to try to eventually Conine Dairy, the last of the dairies in San Diego, it would love to convert over to an organic dairy production that potentially provides specialty cheeses, raw milk, all of that. But we've run into a lot of hurdles and permitting issues that make it very, very difficult for us to do that. So we're trying to work through some of those. This is where we'll need leaders within an urban environment if we want to connect people to their local agriculture, then we have to help the farmers. We ship a lot of our milk elsewhere to be made into a high quality butter. I would much prefer to make butter for the people in San Diego than elsewhere, but it is what it is. And these are some of the challenges we face on a day-to-day basis. So the San Marcos dairy, there's Hollandia. A lot of people think Hollandia is a dairy. It's a dairy processor, but they don't farm. They don't have a dairy operation. There is no other commercial dairy operation other than the Conine Dairy. It's a Dutch dairy, started in 1962, 60 years ago by Frank Conine Sr., and is continuing to survive due to the efforts and truthfully the hard work and sweat equity of Frank Conine Jr. He's extremely innovative, and he's come up with all kinds of ways, including the recycling of organics. All the, not all, but a good portion of the revenue we make from the recycling of and selling of compost goes to feed the cows that produce the dairy milk. And so that's one of the ways we survive. So with that, I mean, if there's no further questions, Kate, I don't know if you want to let everybody out early.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that interesting information. And you were correct on that date. May 18th is the next webinar. And this webinar will be posted probably next week on our website if you want to refer back to it.
Great. And as I mentioned earlier, my contact information is there. I am more than glad to address any questions offline that you may have, not only about para-urban agriculture, but the resources necessary to sustain it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Craig.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you all for joining us. I appreciate your attention.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Well, have a good evening, everyone.